September 1983. A Korean Airlines jumbo jet leaves Anchorage, Alaska, on a long overnight leg to Seoul, climbing out over the North Pacific with 269 people on board. For a while, Flight 007 follows its plan. Then, quietly, its track begins to drift. The route from Anchorage to Seoul was supposed to be precise. A series of waypoints stepping the Boeing 747 across international waters, skirting Soviet territory before turning south toward Korea. Instead, investigators later found that shortly after departure, the autopilot was left in, or reverted to, a simple heading mode. Rather than following the inertial navigation system along the programmed route, the jet held a constant magnetic heading. The difference didn't show up instantly, but over hours, that steady heading carried the aircraft more than 200 miles off course, away from the safe corridor, and toward Siberia. Out over open ocean at night, with few external cues, and the inertial navigation system seemingly running in the background, it's believed the crew never realized their airplane was drifting across a boundary that existed only on charts and in military doctrine. As Flight 007 pushed west, its unintended path carried it over the Kamchatka Peninsula, a region packed with Soviet radar installations, missile sites, and air bases. To the Soviet air forces, the unknown track didn't look like a sleeping passenger route. It looked like a potential intelligence flight, probing their defenses. Fighter aircraft were scrambled. An initial interception attempt near Kamchatka failed when the defenders couldn't get a clear shot before the Boeing continued on. But Flight 007's constant heading kept carrying it forward, toward Sakhalin Island in the Sea of Japan, deeper into a zone the Soviets considered strictly off-limits. In the cabin, passengers settled into the rhythm of a long overnight flight. Seatbelts loosened. Lights dimmed. The low hum of 4 engines filling the darkness around them. Far below, radar stations were tracking their airplane as an unidentified intruder. And in Soviet briefing rooms, officers argued about what it really was and what to do about it. Near Sakhalin Island, as Flight 007 approached the edge of Soviet-controlled airspace, a Sukhoi Su-15 interceptor was vectored toward the jumbo jet. The fighter pilot reported seeing the target visually. In later testimony and analysis, he described a large aircraft with the typical navigation lights of an airliner, not the profile of a nimble spy plane. Despite this, Soviet command treated the track as hostile. They attempted radio calls on civil aviation frequencies. They fired warning shots. Shots that, in the darkness, were almost certainly invisible to the crew above. And then they issued a direct order. Destroy the target before it leaves Soviet airspace. At around 3 a.m. local time, on the 1st of September, 1983, the interceptor closed within a few kilometers of the 747 and launched air-to-air missiles. One warhead detonated near the tail of Flight 007. Severe structural damage. Ruptured fuel tanks. Rapid decompression. Partial loss of control inside the cockpit. The aircraft didn't vanish instantly. It climbed briefly, then entered a series of uncontrolled spirals, descending toward the sea near Moneron Island, west of Sakhalin. Within minutes, the jet broke apart and disappeared into the cold waters of the Sea of Japan. All 246 passengers and 23 crew members were lost. News of the disappearance spread quickly. Within days, the United States and other nations accused the Soviet Union of shooting down a civilian airliner and obstructing search and rescue efforts. International outrage was intense. Among the dead were dozens of Americans, including a sitting U.S. congressman, as well as many South Korean and Japanese citizens. The Soviet government initially denied any involvement, then admitted the shootdown, but insisted the aircraft had been on a spy mission and had ignored all warnings. For years, crucial pieces of evidence, including the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, were withheld or not acknowledged. That secrecy fueled speculation and conspiracy theories about what had really happened up there. When the recorders and more detailed data eventually surfaced, a clearer, if still incomplete, picture emerged. Analysis by the International Civil Aviation Organization supported what investigators called the heading mode theory. The autopilot had remained in heading mode, never properly engaged to follow the navigation route, and the crew failed to notice the deviation growing mile by mile across the ocean. Other theories existed, a possible coordinate entry error, or even deliberate deviation, but the evidence overwhelmingly pointed toward human error in managing the automation, not an intentional incursion. The real mystery wasn't whether this was a spy plane. The real question was how a well-equipped, long-range airliner flew virtually an entire ocean crossing in the wrong mode without anyone noticing. Korean Airlines Flight 007 became one of the defining aviation events of the late Cold War. It showed, in the starkest possible way, how a navigation mistake in a civilian cockpit could intersect with geopolitical tension and military assumptions, and produce a catastrophe far beyond the normal bounds of airline risk. For pilots and airlines, the incident reinforced something critical. Automation modes must be understood, routes must be cross-checked, and inertial navigation systems are not set and forget technology. Modern cockpit procedures now emphasize mode awareness, route verification, and redundancy. Lessons sharpened by the knowledge that a simple heading setting, left uncorrected, once steered an airliner into the path of missiles. For militaries and regulators, Flight 007 highlighted the danger of treating every unknown radar track as an enemy first, and a possible civilian aircraft second. Rules of engagement, identification procedures, and communication protocols were scrutinized worldwide, and in many places tightened, to reduce the risk that a lost passenger flight could be misread as a deliberate threat. The disaster also intersected with the evolution of satellite navigation. In the aftermath, the United States moved to make the Global Positioning System, GPS, widely available to civilian users. The idea was straightforward. Better navigation tools meant a far smaller chance that an aircraft would ever drift dangerously off course again. While GPS had been conceived with civilian uses in mind, even before 1983, the public link between Flight 007 and GPS's expansion helped cement that idea, that this Cold War loss had directly shaped how the world navigates today. For passengers, the story carries a quieter, more unsettling lesson. When you sit down in a wide-body cabin and the doors close, your safety depends on more than just the hardware and the crew in front of you. It also rests on invisible lines on maps, on the way your flight appears on someone else's radar screen, and on decisions made far from the seat you're sitting in. Flight 007 crossed one of those lines, an invisible red boundary in the sky, without its passengers ever knowing. In tracing how and why that happened, we don't just revisit a single night in 1983. We see how navigation, human judgment, and international tension can combine, and how aviation has been forced to learn from a path that went 200 miles off course and ended under missile fire.